In this challenge, you'll test your knowledge of content insets and nested scroll views. There are 3 parts to this challenge. Your first task is to add space to the scroll view via insets so it isn't smashed up against the navigation bar and has some extra room at the bottom. Task number 2 is to constrain the text view so that you can enable scrolling within it. And the final task is to turn the stack view of images on the bottom into an embedded scrolling container view controller. Pause the video, give this challenge a try, and then come back to see our solution.
First, I'll handle the insets. I need an outlet for the scroll view, so I'll open up viewcontroller.swift and then main.storyboard in the assistant editor, and drag an outlet. I'll just call it scroll view. I'll close up the assistant editor to make some room. Then in View2load, I can set those content insets. I used 20 points on both the top and bottom edges. Build and run to see if that worked. And it did. Next on the list, I need to find a way to make scrolling work inside of that text view. The problem is that if we activate the scrolling, the height of that text view is no longer defined by the size of the text inside. To fix that, I'll just add a height constraint to the text view. I'll constrain it to be equal to the view's height, and then adjust that to be only 1/4 as tall. Now, in the Attributes Inspector, I can check Scrolling Enabled. And build and run. And we've got vertical scrolling working in the main scroll view, and inside of the text view.
Only one more part of this challenge to go, but this is the most involved one. Refactor that bottom stack view with all of the little images to be its own scroll view using an embedded view controller.
There are several ways to go about starting this, but I'm going to select a stack view and use the Embed In button to embed it into a scroll view to start. Then I'll constrain the stack view to all 4 sides. Now, to add the view controller and a container view at once, I can drag a container view in from the object library. I'll just drag it right into the stack view. You can see this created the embed segue for me. In the size inspector for the new view controller, set it to freeform and set the size to 800 wide and 200 high. If you have a safe area, select the view and get rid of it. You won't need it, and it will just complicate constraints. With that set up, I can drag this whole scroll view onto that new view. The easiest way is probably in the document outline. Then I need to constrain it. I'll drag it out to fill up the view controller and then pin it on all 4 sides. There are 2 more important constraints to set to make this horizontal scroll view work, and the first is the height of the stack view. I'll set it equal to the height of the root view. And now, along with the aspect ratio constraints on the images, the width of the scroll view's content size is nearly set. The only problem now is that this view controller doesn't have a height. I'll fix that by constraining the height of the container view to the toucan image and make it only half as tall. This looks like a mess in Interface Builder, and we could make it easier to see by setting this view controller back to freeform, but if I build and run, I have scrolling in the vertical scroll view, in the text view, and in this embedded horizontal scroll view too.
There's a common problem when dealing with scroll views in keyboards in iOS. When you tap on a text field, the keyboard appears from the bottom of the screen, potentially covering up the text field. Ideally, the keyboard should push up the scroll view when it animates in, and then return the scroll view to its original position as it animates out. This is a perfect time to use content insets. But how do you know when the keyboard will appear?
There are 2 system notifications that you can listen for. UI Keyboard Will Show notification and UI Keyboard Will Hide notification. These notifications will let you run whatever code you'd like when the keyboard is about to show or hide. They can also give you useful information like the size of the keyboard. We'll use this opportunity to change the bottom scroll view content inset to account for the keyboard size. We'll add to the insets when the keyboard appears, and then subtract the same amount when it hides again. Let's give it a try. We're back to our About screen, and if I scroll all the way down here at the bottom, we have a Sign Up for Our Newsletter text field. If I click into that text field and let the simulator's keyboard come up, it just covers up the text field.
If yours isn't working this way, go to the Hardware menu in the simulator and under Keyboard, make sure Connect Hardware Keyboard is unchecked. Then try to build and run again.
What we actually want to happen is for the scroll view to move up and down along with the keyboard so that the text field stays in view. The first thing we need to do is be notified when the keyboard is being shown. So in viewcontroller.swift, we're going to add some observers to Notification Center. First, an observer for when the keyboard shows. And then copy that to create one for when the keyboard hides. You just need to change the notification name from will show to will hide.
What these are doing is saying when the keyboard shows or hides, call this method passed in as the selector argument. This will let us adjust the scroll view's content inset exactly when we need to. We've got a couple of errors now because we haven't written that method yet, so let's do that now. Copy that selector name and paste it to make a new method above View2 called adjustInsetForKeyboard. The requirement for any function passed into these addObserver methods is that it must take exactly one parameter of type notification. This will actually be really handy because that notification will allow us to get the height of the keyboard. To do that, we first need to get the user info from the notification. This property of a notification is a dictionary that contains information you might need to know about that particular notification, like, say, the size of the keyboard. But this is an optional value, so I've used guard here to make sure that we actually have that user info. If we don't have it, we can't proceed. And now we can get the keyboard frame. Remember, user info is a dictionary, so we've subscripted into it with this handy property on UI Responder, keyboard frame and user info key, to get the value we need. There is also a begin user info key, but Apple's documentation recommends end user info, as the height of the keyboard can change during its transition onto the screen. The value we get back from that key is, unhelpfully, of type any. What we want is a cdirect. To get that, force cast to an NS value, and then wrap that whole thing in parentheses, and get the cdirect value.
We want to do something different depending on if the keyboard is showing or hiding. So let's create a boolean to keep track of which is happening. If the name of the notification is will show, it'll be true, otherwise false. And now we can work out what the inset change should be for our scroll view. Make another constant named adjustment height, and we want that to be the keyboard's height plus a little extra space. I'll use 20 points. That'll work for when we show the keyboard, but when it hides, we actually want the inverse of that. We can do that with another conditional operation based on the show boolean we made. And finally, we're ready to update the content inset of the scroll view. Instead of replacing the whole thing with the new UI Edge insets, we can change just one of the sides. In this case, we want to adjust the bottom value. If you have scroll indicators showing on your scroll view, you'll want to change the bottom value for that as well. If you don't want to show scroll indicators, you can turn them off in code or in the Attributes Inspector on the scroll view.
You'll notice we still have these errors even though we created the method. If you click on one of these, it will tell you why. We need to add the Objective-C attribute. You can just click on the Fix button to make it happen. Just one more thing to take care of. iOS will automatically show keyboards for you, but you need to handle hiding them again. In our case, we need to make sure the keyboard dismisses when we're done typing. For that, we can make this view controller a UI text field delegate and implement the text field should return method. This method tells any text fields with this delegate what to do when the return button is tapped on the keyboard. There are a lot of options for what that button might actually say. In our case, it says Go, but generically, it's referred to as the return button. In our example app, we just want the keyboard to go away, so we'll call Resign First Responder on the active text field and return true to say if there is a default action associated with this text field, that should happen too. Now we're ready to build and run.
Scroll all the way to the bottom and tap into the text field. Everything in the scroll view moves up so that we can still see the text field.
If we type something in and then click the Go button, the scroll view slides back down.
Adjusting insets to accommodate a keyboard is a common problem, so we'll let you practice the process in this challenge. We've set up a new starter app for you to use that contains 2 text fields. We've already set up the code to respond to the notifications. Your job is to fill in this to-do. Write the code to adjust the insets based on the keyboard frame, just like we did in the last video. Pause the video now, give the challenge a try, and then come back to see how we did it. Okay, Katie, replace this to-do with something useful.
First, I need to get the user info from the notification. With that user info and the keyboard frame end user info key, I can get the keyboard frame and turn that into a CG rect. Next, I'll set up a Boolean to tell us if the keyboard is showing or hiding, depending on which notification has been passed into the method. And now I can calculate the change I need for the bottom inset. I didn't add anything to the adjustment this time, just to see what it looks like adjusting with the keyboard height out of the box. To wrap up the method, I'll update the content inset bottom value and do the same for the scroll indicator insets. And I'm done! Build and run!
The first text field works, and the second one is moving our scroll view content as well.